Welcome to The Retirement Trainer. Today we are honored to have Jim Rickards, economist, Wall Street veteran, and former Department of Defense advisor. He's here to discuss his new book, Money GPT, which explores how AI, while efficient, could destabilize global finance, potentially triggering bank runs and market chaos. Jim warns that AI's lack of human empathy could elevate risks to national security and even lead to extreme conflict. Join us as we dive into why human judgment is essential in an AI-driven world.
Jim, I welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming. I got to be honest with you. Like I just said before, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. So thanks for being on.
Thanks, Ed. It's great to be with you and with your audience. Looking forward to it. This is fun.
Well, I know we tried to have a conversation last month, but I think the timing having the conversation today is way better because obviously we're 2 days after the election. Donald Trump is the new president. We've got your book coming out in a couple days. I think it's the 12th, right? Is when it hits shelves.
That's right.
Um,
Tuesday, yeah.
yeah. So I think it's better timing for our conversation today. And early on, I became a fan of yours. I read your book. I don't know when it came out, but I think I read it in 15 or 16. It was called The Death of Money.
Right.
And
That came out 2014, but yeah, it was pretty popular exactly around that 2015 or so. That's right.
yeah, and back then, I think you were ahead of your time, with that book, and you wrote it in such a way that it was so common sense. And I think when people look back at it, they're like, oh, well, of course, right? And the new Great Depression, some of the other best-selling books that you've written, and now you've got Money GPT coming out.
Mhm.
There's just so many things, and I think they all very similarly correlate to each other. But Money GPT, with AI, that is really where we're heading right now with everything, including in the finance world. We're talking about CBDC, central bank digital currency.
Right.
That's been at the forefront. So I've got to ask, what compelled you to write Money GPT?
Well, thanks, Ed. I think you're right. The timing is interesting. We're after the election. The book launches in a matter of days. It's available. You can buy it online at Amazon. By the way, we were ranked by Amazon as the number one new release in finance. So that's one of our lanes, one of our categories. They have different rankings in different categories, but we're the number one new release in finance. And you're right, the book is out in a couple of days, but available for pre-order now. Yeah, the book writing process is interesting. I'm not sure it's changed very much since the 19th century. I think Charles Dickens would still recognize it. I mean, first of all, you have to write the book, but that involves a lot of research and writing. I should issue a disclaimer. I did write it. It was not written by GPT. You can actually you can get some GPT software and say write a book on this topic, and it'll do it. So we have to distinguish here. But of course I wrote it. And about it was late 2022 when we kicked it off, and I always have a very good relationship with my publisher, Penguin Random House, and the chief editor, and they're very supportive. And but she did say to me, she said, Jim, we think this is a hot topic, but how do we know, a year and a half from now when the book comes out that this will still be hot? And I said, Nikki, I guarantee it. I promise you, AI is getting bigger. It's not going away. It'll be as topical as ever, more so. And that's turned out to be the case. There was a big splash in late 22 and in 2022 when they came out with GPT-4. This is from Open
Right.
AI. They used that particular chat feature, a particular app, which is what it is. So it got something like 200 million downloads in the first 60 days. It was the fastest take up of any app ever, even more so than Instagram and TikTok and some of the other successes. So it was red hot. People were talking about, but it was a lot to absorb. And I knew a lot about it. I've been working on AI models since the early 2000s, around 2003. I was a part of a group, but I was co-director. We built a AI model for the CIA to detect terrorist attacks using market information. I always say, they didn't need me to jump out of a helicopter with a knife between my teeth, but they didn't have a lot of capital markets expertise, and they're very good at reaching out because capital markets had not been part of the battle space during the Cold War and the post-Soviet era, but all of a
Hmm.
sudden it was, because there was insider trading before 9/11. And so the question was, if there's going to be another attack like that, would there be insider trading again? Could you spot it? Could you trace it to the source, get a FISA warrant, break down the door, and stop the attack? That was our mission. And we, after research, concluded that the answer to all those questions was yes, you could do it. And then we built a working prototype that was very successful. So that was an AI model, maybe a little primitive by today's standards, but I have been in the field for a long time, so I felt comfortable writing a book about it. I knew the importance of it. As I say, it's more important now than ever. But what I did, and I make the point, AI is very powerful, no question about it.
Right.
It will do a lot of good, not going away, whether you like it or not. And I make the point in the book. I said it's here. I'm not writing a book about something that's coming in 3 or 4 years. I mean, we do lean forward, but the bigger point was it's here now.
That's right.
You open your refrigerator and there's a light that says time to change the water filter. Well, that's AI. I mean, that's somebody's, got a clock, there's a computer rather in your refrigerator with a little chip. It's got a clock running and measuring the moisture and telling you what to do. It's on the dashboard of your car. It's in Alexa and Siri, and it's everywhere. So, but what I did, and GPT and AI. GPT is just a subset of AI. It's a particular application, but it's all under the AI umbrella. It'll be able, with these large language models and the increased processing power, which comes from NVIDIA and Intel and AMD and some others, but mainly NVIDIA, they're the leader. They'll be able to go through, for example, in biochemistry and medicine, millions and millions of molecular combinations that may or may not have some beneficial impact, may be able to cure disease, for example. Now, can humans do that? Yes, but not nowhere near the pace. A room full of the smartest people in the world working for 100 years wouldn't be able to look at as many potential compounds as a computer can. This particular kind of computer, AI, with the processing power, can do in hours or days or some very short period of time. So I recognize that, but that's not my lane. What I wanted to do is take AI and GPT and look at it in the two areas where I do have expertise. One is capital markets and banking, and the other is national security, particularly nuclear warfighting. So good luck with the biochemistry and the medicine and the engineering and all those other things. And AI is relevant in those fields. And in terms of building a portfolio, you'll want to know how. But I really look at capital markets and, as I say, national security. And the main point I make, it's not a doom and gloom book. It's like, oh, it's the end of the
Right.
world or whatever. And actually, in the conclusion, I go down on the side that the AI systems are not going to take over the world. They'll get bigger and faster, but we may actually be at some of the limits of that, like physical limits in terms of energy inputs and processing power, and what the computers can actually do with or without more processing power. For example, they've done kind of experiments. So on GPT, they'll ask a computer, here's a bunch of parameters. What's the way to make the world a better place? How would you make the world a better place? And the answer is kill all the humans because they mess things up. We can take that debate to the bar, but that's what the computer said. And then people say, well, if you actually were powerful enough, maybe you would get together with other computers and think on your own and kill all the humans if you could. So that's the fear. I recognize that, and there are some top scientists who warn about that, but I say that won't happen, and I explain why, that there's particular kinds of logic that computers can't do, that would be needed to get to that stage. But that's at the end of the book. Maybe it gives people a little reassurance. And so it's not doom and gloom, and it does stay in the areas I described. But I issue a warning. I say, yeah, this is good in some ways, it's powerful, but it also has very there are extreme dangers for investors, things that the engineers hadn't thought about. And what you're doing, really, you're taking engineers and developers and Wall Street market experts, and you're mashing them up. You're combining their skills to create these programs. Sounds good, but there are two problems. And one is the engineers don't really understand Wall Street. They try, but they understand math. And Wall Streeters tend to be super bullish, like anything that makes stocks go up, we're for it, without thinking about the dangers. They have a blind spot there. But I've been through enough and been around long enough to know what some of those things are. So I turned to that, and point out how AI and GPT and deep fakes, we know what those are, using AI to create visual and audio images that are they're invented. They look real. They act real. There was one reporter, she was working on an article on this, and she went to one of the top companies that can produce these. I'm not saying they're doing anything wrong. It's just software. And she gave it so many hours of her voice and so many hours of video, and delivered it to the company and said, make a fake version of me. And they did. And she showed it to her mother, and her mother couldn't tell it wasn't her. So that kind of potential exists and is real. So that's what I do. So I explain the technology, and I do it in plain English. And just to be
Yes.
clear, I never dumb things down. They're not dumbed down. I'm kind of working at a PhD level in terms of what we're talking about, but I've almost never seen anything at that level that couldn't be explained in plain English. In other words, the experts they like jargon. They talk among themselves. They have their own language. It excludes anybody who's not an expert. It makes them sound maybe a little smarter than they actually are, as the case may be. But there, all of this can be put in plain English. You use metaphors. You use
Hmm.
critical reasoning. Instead of a $100 word, you use some plain English, but maybe a few more words. But you can explain it all,
Yep.
and I do. And so hopefully people get something out of it.
You know what? I think they will. And you touched on a couple things. Everyone thinks that AI is recent, with, Chat GPT, but like you said, it's been around for a long time. For us, as, advisors and financial planners, in trading, algorithmic trading, I mean, that's a form of AI, and it's been around for a long time. We're just
Right.
seeing more and more in our daily lives, like, smart homes, and our vehicles. We're seeing it, in some of these electric cars that are more advanced. And you've done a really good job in your book, not to coin a title from a Clint Eastwood movie, but you lay out kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of
Mhm.
AI, and you do it in plain English so that it is understandable at a very high level. But I think everyone can, as they read it, it's going to give them the ability to think through things that maybe they hadn't thought of before. Especially as it relates to AI and the global economy. So what? First of all, so let's talk about some of the good. So what do you think some of the good is that AI can do? And then let's talk about some of the threats to the global economy and the world markets.
Well, it's a great question. And actually, those two things are related. The good that it can do and the dangers that it causes are from the same kind of root causes. So just to answer the question directly, I mean, there are some hedge funds that have been set up that where the managers say, we've outsourced the stock picking to AI. We just, AI can read, a million pages of 10Ks, 10Qs, eight, 8Ks, et cetera. Um,
Hmm.
Research reports, official statements, letters, balance sheets, can analyze it all. You can do it, I can do it, but it takes time. But if you could do millions of pages in a pretty short period of time and produce a report, okay, that could be a very good research report at speeds that humans can't keep up with. So there are a couple hedge funds like this, but one in particular, they're getting good results. They've said to the AI, "You pick the stocks for us. Here are the parameters, and here's the what they call the training set. That's the set
Hmm.
of materials that the large language model goes through and reads over and over to try to form, particularly with GPT, where you're going to produce reports that need to be readable, grammatical. That's how you do it. So it's capable of that. But what's going to happen, it's happening already, is that more and more, as more and more, whether a hedge fund or investment advisor, wealth manager, et cetera, move into that field, it's going to get more and more crowded. And what they're going to discover is that everyone's getting the same results. In other words, it's not that these programs are wildly different. They're actually very much alike. You may have a different, you or any other manager may have a different investment approach. We're looking at a particular, we're a tech fund or we're a bio fund, whatever. But so you'll limit your parameters that way, but the results are going to be very much the same. So there's going to be a lot of crowding in these spaces. And one of the things I do is in chapter one, I describe a market meltdown but it's not. I mean, we've seen them. They're,
Right.
March 2020, the stock market fell 30% in 30 days. It wasn't the biggest crash in history, but it was the fastest crash of that magnitude in history. 30% is a long way down, and it happened over the course of the month. And now the market
Right.
came back, and that's fine. But what do people do in those situations? And this is where the outsourcing to the AI is problematic. So the market starts to go down, and then some people watch it, and some people get out. Others like, oh, it's going to come back. It's going to come back. We have all these cognitive biases and human fallacies. Well, sometimes it doesn't come back, at least not anytime soon. And then people finally say, okay, I'm going to sell everything, go to cash, go to the sidelines, wait it out, and then when there's some stability, I'll tiptoe back into the market. That can actually be a very good strategy for an individual, but this points to something called the fallacy of composition, and fancy term, but what that means
Right.
is that, give you a good example. Let's say you're at a baseball game and you don't have a very good view. Maybe the person in front of you is wearing a hat, or they're too tall, or whatever. And so you say, well, I'm going to stand up to see the game. You stand up and you actually can see the game. You can see much better. It's like, hey, this is great. But what happens next? Well, the person behind you stands up, then the person behind her stands up, and pretty quickly the whole stadium's on their feet. Nobody's better off because they have the same view they had before, and everybody's worse off because they're all standing. And that's called the fallacy composition. What it means is a strategy that's good for an individual may be catastrophic if done at a large scale. Now, you know how hard it is to make money, but it's even worse when you lose money. Part of
Right.
making money is hanging on to it, and not losing it.
That's
So
right.
in a panic, yeah, people will sell and go to cash. Again, a good individual strategy, not the only one, but a good one. But it's catastrophic at large scale, because what happens if everybody's selling? If you have all sellers, no buyers, markets go straight down. They blow through the circuit breakers, and they'll actually close the markets. It's not just a 15-minute timeout for a circuit breaker. No, it's worse than that. It keeps going. They reopen, closes again, reopen, closes again, close for the day, maybe can't open the next day. And it's markets are actually closed for a period of time, which, by the
Mhm.
way, it doesn't mean your property is gone. What it means is that your liquid stocks that you thought you could sell and take a distribution in your 401k or whatever are private equity. When you close markets, you convert liquid stocks into private equity. Friend of mine is director of floor operations at the New York Stock Exchange, and I was down on the floor with him. There's a lot of security to get to the floor of the exchange. But he turned to me and said, Jim, don't let anyone ever tell you there's any liquidity down here, because there isn't. Now, you go back to maybe as late as the 90s, but certainly before that, they had something on New York Stock Exchange, but other exchanges. They had something called the specialist. And the specialist had a privilege and a duty. The privilege was you got to be the exclusive market maker in a particular stock, American Airlines or IBM or whatever, and you got to see the back of the book. You didn't just see the best bid and offer, you got to see the whole chain. But your
Mhm.
duty was to make a market, meaning if you had all sellers, you had to sort of sit there and be a buyer and try to, mitigate the damage a little bit. Or if you had a buying frenzy, your duty was maybe to be a seller and just kind of damp it down a little bit. That's over. That's gone. And now with computers, what they tend to amplify the danger rather than mitigate it. So if you get into a selling wave, the computers are like racing each other to sell as fast as they can. And I give a scenario. That's, the book's nonfiction, but I give a story of how this would play out. I hope it's very accessible. I think it is. We have a couple of characters. So one guy runs a family office, very wealthy, has a family office. Another group, two seasoned hedge fund traders, but they're crooks, they're market manipulators, and they're trying to cause a market panic and front run it and make money. There's another group, they're Chinese cyber warfare, cyber warriors, who want to destroy markets. They're not trying to make money, they're trying to destroy the Western economy. They have a geopolitical motive, but again, they're leaning in the same direction, which is destroy markets. And I have other characters. There's a chairman of the Fed and reporters and others, and they're all using AI in different ways, as a trading assistant to execute orders, to give ideas, etc. And anyway, I don't want to give away the plot, but I hope people enjoy. But it shows how through the interaction the market can go straight down. Actually, markets can be closed, and trillions of dollars of wealth can be wiped out very quickly. But here's the point: there's no mastermind. the manipulators in Mallorca are not talking to the Chinese cyber warriors, and the Chinese cyber warriors are not talking to the family office in New York, and the Fed's kind of the last to know. They're all these people operating independently for their own purposes, but they're using AI. But the AI algorithms are all more or less the same, and they reinforce each other, and they create exactly this kind of cascading catastrophe that I described in the baseball metaphor. But basically, the markets go straight down and close. So the warning to investors is, yeah, AI can do some good. It can help you pick stocks. It's good research tool, no question about it. Some people have gone further and they've empowered the AI to make the trades. But be aware of the fact that these are, in a market, you have a lot of different perspectives. Even forgetting about the old specialist system, you have active traders who might see a meltdown and say, maybe it's time to dive in. Maybe there's some bargains here. Maybe I can buy the dip or whatever. There might be reasons to come in, but that is a combination of instinct, a kind of gut instinct, smart guesswork, intuition. Computers can't do that. All they can do is sort of follow orders. And so the computers, if you empower the computers and then combine that with human nature, which is, as I say, sell everything, go to cash, move to the sidelines. You empower that with computers, like putting a turbocharger on a car. It happens faster than people can imagine. It happens, more radically. And there's nothing on the other side. There's no computer on the other side saying time to buy. And if that's the case, and it is the case, and I think I illustrate that both in computer space, in AI space, in terms of how these algorithms work. By the way, there's no intelligence in artificial intelligence. It's a nice name. It's like, oh, a computer has a brain. No, it doesn't. It's all math. It is all math, and it's not your friend. And that's another thing I point out in the book. We, as humans, we have a tendency to anthropomorphize things. We project human qualities onto inanimate objects. So, for example, Alexa. So you have an Alexa in your house. Say, hey, Alexa, turn down. Alexa, turn down the lights. Lights go down. Hey, Alexa, pick a different TV channel, or turn on the security system, whatever. Okay, and then it does it. And we tend to treat them like friends. Like Alexa's like now part of the household. Same thing with Siri and a lot of other applications. And we give them human qualities. So we start to think they're like us. Like they got a brain. They're going to do the right thing. No, they're not humans. They're not intelligent. It's all math. They're not your friends. They will perform tasks as directed, and they seem human, but they're not. But there's a lot of danger there because people become overconfident. They do think that these computer systems are just like you or me or any friend or family member or whatever, and they're really not. So there are just a whole bunch of pitfalls here that it doesn't mean get rid of AI, but what it does mean is understand how it works, understand the dangers. And I never do scenarios like this without offering some, solutions, some positive recommendations. And there are a couple in the book. One is something called cybernetics. And a way to explain that, cybernetics is it's English, but it's from a Greek word, but it literally means the helmsman, the person who steers the boat. And a good example here, I happen to have a place in the mountains, so I'm used to driving on ice and snow. But if you're driving on ice and you slam on the brakes for whatever reason, the car's not going to stop. It's going to keep going because it's on ice, and it'll probably start to spin and go out of control and maybe go off the road. So if you're in that situation and you need to slow down a little bit, you tap the brakes. You tap the brakes, keep two hands on the wheel, keep it under control. You don't slam the brakes. Well, circuit breakers and other solutions in the stock market are the equivalent of slamming the brakes. But what you could do is use a different methodology, and this is where cybernetics come in. For example, so let's say the market's starting to go down. Instead of waiting for the market to go down 20% and you hit a circuit breaker, just say, maybe at 5%, we're going to throttle the order flow a little bit. So you put in a sell order for 1,000 shares, and they say, well, we're going to execute 200. We're not going to execute 1,000. We'll put you in the queue. You're not losing your property, but we're not going to dump that order on the market. And then maybe if it's down another 5%, all right, well, now we're only doing 500 shares. It doesn't matter how many you want to sell. We're only doing 500 shares, and do it 500 shares. Do it to everybody,
Right.
pro rata. The idea is you're tapping the brakes. You're not turning out the lights all at once. So that's a technical solution to a technical problem.
I, you
But
know,
the
I,
other solution,
I think that's
sorry,
a
guys.
I think that's a great solution because it is, right? I mean, it's panic buying or panic selling, just, run on banks. It's, it becomes a, self-fulfilling prophecy. And,
Right.
why hasn't anyone, thought of that before and actually, implemented that type of process or procedure? I mean, has that even come up before? And do you think we could implement that under the new administration?
I think we could. And by the way, the circuit breakers that I described, they're fairly recent vintage. They came in after the 1987. Remember,
Right.
in October 19th, 1987,
Monday.
stock market fell 21% in one day. One day, not
Yeah.
so that by today's standards, on the Dow, that would be 8,000 Dow points in one day. Not 800, 8,000. That's what happened. So they looked for solutions, and there was, I wouldn't exactly call it AI, but there was a primitive form of automated trading behind that, having to do with options and how you hedge options and so forth. One of my friend of mine and business partner has sadly passed away not long ago, but David Mullins Jr. was the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, and he was close to Nick Brady, who was Secretary of the Treasury at the time, and he led the commission, the report on the flash crash. It was, interagency and so forth. He later became vice chairman of the Fed, and he was the one who came up with the idea of the circuit breakers. So the circuit breakers are it was an innovation at the time, but
Hmm.
by today's standards, exactly as you described it, with self-fulfilling prophecy and so forth, it's a little bit of a blunt instrument, better than nothing,
Right.
but you can refine that to have a whole bunch of mini circuit breakers. By the way, another colleague of mine, Robert C. Merton, who won the Nobel Prize in economics,
Yeah.
I had the privilege of meeting his father, Robert K. Merton, who was the greatest sociologist of the 20th century. If they had a Nobel Prize in sociology, which they don't, but if they did, he would have won it. But Robert K. Merton was the inventor of the expression self-fulfilling prophecy. You use it, I use it. It's a really powerful phenomenon. It's important to understand it. It's something that starts out not being true, but if enough people believe it and behave accordingly, it becomes true by
Hmm.
the end of the day. And he was, and the run on the bank was the classic case, but you can never run on stocks. You can never run on Fort Knox, or at least the Federal Reserve gold supply. We're kind of witnessing that at the moment. So yeah, there are things you can do, but for investors, if you're not the head of the SEC or some agency that could actually do what we're talking about, I recommend putting some of your assets, not all, but a slice of your assets into non-digital assets, things that are not going to be affected by computers, that are not going to be caught up in a cascade, not subject to the kind of dangers we've been talking about. And we know what they are. It's gold, silver, fine art, land, natural resources. There are a set of things that have value that tend to perform very well over time. But the key thing is they can't be suspended by a stock exchange rule book. They're non-digital, and if you have them in a safe place, they'll see you through.
Well, you know what? That's interesting because, first of all, I believe that. I just had a conversation with Robert Kiyosaki, and we went through this in detail. And the same thing with Jim Rogers. I mean, and the list goes on and on, right?
Yep.
That's those folks who kind of get the bigger picture, understand, and it's that that cliche, financial literacy, right? Trying to get people to
Yep.
understand, the bigger picture. And it's not just about your 401k, it's not just about your stock portfolio. You've got to, make sure that you're hedging your bets and have a true storage of value, just in the event the worst does occur.
Right.
So you talk about in your book, you kind of touched on it, the lack of human empathy with AI. And how do you think AI, especially in if the dangers of AI, if it were in, the bad actors, got involved,
Yep.
and the threats to not to be gloom and doom, but the reality of nuclear war, because that kind of has really come to the forefront here in the last 4 years. So, how do you think that interaction with AI, bad actors, and nuclear war, do you think that's a danger?
Well, first of all, it's definitely a danger. And leaving AI aside, I'll come back to that. It's a great question, but leaving AI to one side, the threat of nuclear war right now is greater than it has been since the 80s and before that, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. And just to kind of explain why that's the case, I started studying nuclear war fighting in the late 1960s. A lot of the best work on that subject have been written in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And the big brains were Albert and Roberta Wohlstetter, Paul Nitze, Herman Kahn, Henry Kissinger, and others. But of all of them, Herman Kahn was probably the biggest brain, and he outlined what causes a nuclear war. And the basic idea is that nobody wakes up and looks out the window and says, "Oh, nice day. I think I'll start a nuclear war." That's not how it happens. It happens through escalation. You've got protagonists or antagonists, and one does something provocative. The other one kind of fires back, doesn't have to be kinetic, but pushes back. The other one raises the ante, the second one, and so forth. And you're climbing a ladder towards nuclear war. And Herman Kahn, in a couple iterations in the 1960s, he kept refining the idea, actually came up with, I think, 54 steps on the ladder. You could have meant more, scale it back a little bit, but he had this ladder. And what he said is when you're on that ladder, escalating one versus the other, you're moving towards nuclear war. And here's what you need to do. You need to, first of all, realize it, understand what you're doing. This is not just, and by the way, this is what's going on in Ukraine. The US, MI6, and CIA sponsored a coup in 2014. Russia comes in, takes Crimea. Then the US started sending the weapons. And then Russia started the special military operation. And then we're giving them Bradley fighting vehicles and Abrams tanks and Patriot anti-missile systems and ATACMS missiles. And Russia's bringing in hypersonic missiles. And both sides are escalating, and they're
Escalate.
both
Yep,
nuclear power.
absolutely.
Correct. We're walking up that ladder, and same thing in the Middle East. Again, people have different views on what's going on there. We can take that to the bar, but the escalatory dynamic, there's no question about it, where Israel took out the Hamas leadership, took out the Hezbollah leadership. Iran struck them, they struck back. And you've got nuclear powers all around, Russia, again, Russia, United States, and Israel's a nuclear power, and Iran's not that far away. So we've got two hotspots that are both climbing that nuclear escalatory ladder. So what Herman Kahn said was, first of all, realize it, understand what you're doing. That's hard because, policymakers are not always the brightest lights. Two, take a beat. Three, start to come down, start to come back down the ladder. And that we're not at that stage yet. So that's the dynamic. Now, we saw that in the Cuban Missile Crisis. We were on the ladder, but Kennedy and Khrushchev actually reached out. He sent a letter to Kennedy. It was actually passed to a reporter, but they met at a bar. It used to be the Occidental Bar in D.C., but that information was passed along. Kennedy took the cue, and they moved back down the ladder. But there were two cases in the 1980s, and I talked about them in the book. One of them was, first of all, the KGB, which was the intelligence service at the time, the Soviet Union, but basically Russia, had a primitive form of AI. They had a system called VRION, and that system would take a whole bunch of inputs and would calculate the relative power of the Soviet Union and the United States based on some scoring system. And what they looked at, they knew the US has stronger economy and maybe stronger military, but they looked at the gap, and they said, as the gap grows, there will come a time when the US is so superior that they'll start a nuclear war. They'll feel that they're sufficiently robust, they could do it, they could take us out and get away with it. And that gap was the measure of the danger of the US striking first. But if you know anything about nuclear war fighting, the minute you think the other guy's going to strike first, you strike first, because there's always an advantage in launching the first strike. And so seeing that, so that was their system, and they had concluded that the US was getting close to that point. The spread was dangerously lopsided in favor of the United States. Around the same time, this is the summer of 1983, U.S. and NATO, we're the leader of NATO, we're conducting a war game. They do that all the time. I've done financial war games for the Pentagon, but this particular war game was a nuclear strike. That was what they were. That was the scenario they were playing out, done at a very high level. The KGB picked it up, of course, and they said to themselves, "Oh, they're pretending to do a nuclear strike, but they're actually working on a nuclear strike. It's a front or a cover for a first strike." And we base that on V. Ryan, which says that the U.S. has reached this position of superiority where this is what they're going to do. So they started, fueling their bombers, putting them on the runways, activating their missile systems, instead of getting ready maybe to shoot first. There was a general, a lieutenant general in the U.S. Army, General Perutz, who was in charge of this war game. He saw this. He saw what the Soviets were doing, and he took it upon himself. This was not standard operating procedure. He took it upon himself to call a timeout in the war game and dial it down. He said, "We're on this path, and we know it's a game, but they don't know it's a game. They think it's real. They have no reason to believe us, but we have to act out. Just dial it down." The Soviets picked up on it. They de-escalated, and we narrowly avoided nuclear war. Around the same time, actually, different circumstance, Russia had another AI system codenamed Oko. And what this did, it was basically a radar that detected incoming U.S. missiles. And when the operator got a signal, they said, 5 U.S. nuclear missiles incoming right now, got a launch warning. This guy's job was to notify his superiors, who probably would have, because there's a doctrine called launch on warning. When you see the other missiles coming in, you don't wait for them to hit, you shoot your own missiles. So he was supposed to notify his superiors. They probably would have shot the missiles, and that would have been maybe the end of the world, a nuclear holocaust at the time. Instead, he took it upon himself, again, contrary to orders, to not notify his superiors. He didn't tell them he got the launch warning. He had actually worked on the system. He knew it had flaws. And what he said was, he actually used some inference. The system picked up 5 missiles. He said, if the U.S. were attacking us, they wouldn't launch 5 missiles. They would launch 200. So he used that inferentially to say that it's probably a false alarm. Turns out it was. There was a strange combination of clouds and sun, and there was a reflection of the sun off the clouds into the radar that made the radar say these are missiles, but they weren't actually missiles. That was Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, who later became known as the man who saved the world. Now, the point of those 2 stories, they're scary enough, they'll keep you up at night, but the point of the stories is we averted nuclear catastrophe in both cases because an individual human disobeyed orders, did not follow standard operating procedure, did not have good evidence to back them up, but they relied on their gut instincts and their intuition and what I would call common sense to avoid a nuclear war. And it's a good thing. Computers cannot do that. They cannot do that. We're familiar with what's called deductive logic, where you have a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. Aristotle invented it. It's been around ever since. And there's a form of logic called inductive logic, which is we basically take in a whole bunch of observations and we draw an inference. We say, hey, this is everywhere, so it must be true, or it must be commonplace, or I'll find it elsewhere because it's everywhere I look. Both of those forms of logic have flaws, but the flaws are well known and they can be programmed. You can program a computer to use deductive logic and inductive logic, and you can even do both. But there's a third branch of logic called abductive logic that very few people know anything about. It was kind of outlined by a philosopher, 19th century American philosopher named Charles Sanders Peirce. Peirce was 100 years ahead of his time. The problem with being 100 years ahead of his time is it takes 100 years for people to understand what you're saying. But he came up with, now I don't want to turn this into a lecture on abductive logic.
No. That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. But what it is, if you wanted to put it in 2 words, it's common sense. By the way, I'm hearing the phrase common sense coming out of the Trump campaign. I'm not saying they're readers of Charles Sanders Peirce, but a lot of what the Trump supporters are saying is we just want to get back to common sense. Well, Peirce was actually the father of semiotics, which is the major branch of philosophy today, and basically it's reading signals, but it was a common sense approach. So my point is, we've never seen a case where abductive logic or common sense can be programmed. In fact, it may be non-programmable, which is the warning, which is the danger, because if you're relying on systems, we as humans rely on common sense and bias, candidly, to survive. But if we're going to rely on computers, but computers cannot exhibit that human trait, we're in trouble because they're going to lack that ability to, again, climb back down the ladder.
And have that common sense. I don't know if you remember this, but there was actually a movie. I'm not going to get the title right, but I think it was called War Games. Remember where it kind of was a similar scenario, right? Where
Yep.
the computers, they did not have that line of reasoning that you were just talking about. And so it took that human
Right.
interaction to say, it's just a game, right? It's just an exercise.
Yep.
So, um,
That's right.
in
I did. I led a war game for the Pentagon. We were actually in a place called the Warfare Analysis Laboratory, which is part of the Applied Physics Laboratory. It's halfway between Washington and Baltimore, but it's very close to NSA headquarters. But we were in. I'm thinking of the movie. It was called War Games, but we were in one of those big war game rooms, with big screens on the walls and a couple hundred people and all that. But
right.
that is what they do.
Well, so let me ask you this. With the information that your background, your history, you've written a lot of books on, the dollar, digital currency, AI, all of these things right now. What are your predictions? Where do you see the future of AI in the financial world? I mean, what should we expect?
We should expect a meltdown triggered or amplified by AI along the lines I just described. And the reason I say that, I'm not going out on a limb at all. My point is, these meltdowns happen anyway. I could give you
Right.
examples, I'm sure you're familiar with them, of financial panics in the mid 14th century. The 1350s, the House of Bardi and the House of Peruzzi in Milan collapsed and caused a financial panic throughout Europe. So that's not new. That's part of human nature, it's part of banking and leverage and everything else we understand. What is new is AI. AI takes that aspect of human nature, which has been around probably forever, and it amplifies it, it accelerates it, it makes it faster. It happens before you know it. In the case of nuclear warfighting, there's something called flash war, which is you go up the escalatory chain that we talked about, but it's not the Cuban Missile Crisis where you had 3 weeks to figure it out, or even Able Archer 83, which was the example I gave you about the war game, where they had a few weeks to detect it and say, maybe we need to dial this down. This could happen literally within hours or minutes. And that's one of the dangers of computers. And they lack what we talked about, which is the empathy. So my advice there is keep AI out of the nuclear kill chain, the nuclear warfighting kill chain. Keep it out of the kill chain. If you want it over here as a research assistant or analytic thing, fine, and understand what it is. But do not put it in the decision-making chain, or you will get those kind of results. When it comes to capital markets, same thing. I mean, the problem with capital market, it's already in the decision-making chain.
Right.
It's there. And there, so that doesn't, a market meltdown of the kind I described does not mean the end of the world. It does not mean the end of life on Earth, but it might mean the end of your portfolio if you get caught up in it. And they are, again, things like cybernetics, which I talk about and I describe, just being aware of the dangers and also diversifying your portfolio in such a way that if it happens, you're going to come out okay. It doesn't mean you don't, take a little bit of a beating on a stock market portfolio, but and I'm not saying don't have stocks, of course we do, but have these other assets that will weather the storm.
All right. So if you could give the new administration some advice to protect against a run, all right, on banks, the financial markets, or self-fulfilling prophecy of before we hit the circuit breakers, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
I would, sounds harsh, but the next time we're in a Silicon Valley, Credit Suisse, First Republic
Hmm.
kind of meltdown, which we just went through in the spring of 2023, um, let a bank fail, let a couple of banks fail. It's hard. It's hard medicine, but that will that will teach people. And by the way, we have FDIC insurance, a $250,000 account, but there were Silicon Valley Bank.
Yes.
93% of the accounts were uninsured. This was not mom and pop $200,000 CDs. These were multi-billion dollar accounts, some of which came from crypto exchanges, which had dollars and put them in the bank. A lot of Silicon Valley startups with $10 million accounts and so forth. Let somebody fail, let the bank fail, let some of that pain be spread around, and let the stock go to zero, let the bondholders take a haircut. Yeah, absolutely protect the depositors up to the insured limit, but everything over the insured limit, hey, we'll give a certificate, we'll liquidate the bank and get back to you. It'll be worth something, but we don't know if it's 10 cents on the dollar or 80 cents on the dollar, but we'll get back to you. That would instill discipline. All of a sudden people say, hey, gee, my bank's not risk-free. Anything over the deposit insurance limit, I'm taking a chance. And then people would impose discipline on the banks. Forget capital. I mean, I'm not saying there's no role for capital. Capital will not protect you. There's all these regulations, Basel III and all this, without to get too technical. They keep saying, well, I have more capital, it'll protect bank accounts. No, it doesn't. It sends a good signal. It maybe instills some confidence in the short run, but the point is capital. If you don't have a bank panic, you actually don't need any capital, and if you do have a bank panic, no capital is enough. So it's kind of for show, but what does matter is, as I say, is confidence and management, good risk management, and understanding the dangers. And what I do in the book in Money GPT, I just try to identify some of these dangers so that people can go into it with their eyes wide open.
Well, you know what? I completely agree with that. We need to have a little short-term pain, so that the long term we have a better prospect for success. But we're so unwilling to accept any kind of pain, and we just expect everyone to say, you know what, here's your money back, and
That's right.
not take the risk. So. Jim, first of all, thank you so much. I want to be very respectful of your time. You kind of gave us way more time than what you said you would, so I really do appreciate it. I enjoyed your new book. Good luck with it, and hopefully, they'll heed some of your advice, and hopefully we can get you back on the podcast sometime soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed.
Great
being with you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The Retirement Trainer with your host, Ed Siddell. For our latest retirement news and financial tips, please visit egsifinancial.com or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We look forward to having you back for our next episode, where we will continue to explore the world of retirement. Until then, please remember to click, like, and subscribe. See you next episode.